Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Critical Weight Theory. Let's call this episode Biopower, How Modern Life is Engineered. And we're going to look at how systems shape our lives yet again. And it isn't just a theory. I know it sounds like it's maybe already a conspiracy theory or something like that. But this episode's about how governments, corporations, and institutions in general regulate our lives, not just with laws or police, but by managing our health, education, sexuality, even our identities. So, this is nothing new that I'm presenting here. French philosopher Michel Foucault called it biopower, so I'm actually using his term, and he called it an explosion of numerous and diverse techniques for achieving the subjugation of bodies and the control of populations. So let's break that down. Is it simply a negative thing? Does it mean we're all living in the matrix or whatever? Not necessarily. It certainly sounds bad. Again, it sounds like a conspiracy theory sort of thing. But his theory is actually more complex than that. And biopower actually sort of marks a shift in how modern states exert control, not just by punishing us when we step out of line, but by shaping us so we don't even think to resist and stuff like that. So you might call it the general politics of life. So the state no longer just rules, it manages, it produces life, organizes it, optimizes it, and it does this through systems we experience every day. Healthcare that tracks your body, education that programs your mind, surveillance that monitors your movement and behavior, and of course, the media, which kind of like education sort of programs your mind. And again, it sounds like it's just a paranoid sort of thing, but it is, why they call them cultural institutions, because they are in some ways the purveyors of culture. And these institutions are not neutral. They mold us into productive citizens, so to speak, feeding into the system's need for stability and efficiency. Although, sure, sometimes it seems like there is a need for chaos, and I'll get more into that later. Think Brave New World more than Orwell's 1984, though, yes, there are aspects of the state that are plainly Orwellian. For example, Trump recently selling victory fragrances is something straight out of 1984 in a shockingly literal way, because Orwell's 1984 literally had victory gin and victory cigarettes as a recurring theme. They had the term victory everywhere in that book. It's it's almost one of the humorous aspects of 1984, because you get the sense that they're just overusing that word. And for there to be a fragrance with the word victory on it that is being promoted by the president of the United States, well, it is literally begging people to make these comparisons. And I know it sounds like I'm overusing the word literal here, but in this case it's for emphasis, because this is about as Orwellian of a situation as you can find. It's like it was ripped straight from the book. But anyway, putting stuff like that aside, what are institutions of biopower anyway? So let's start with healthcare. All right, so yes, healthcare. Medicine often reduces people to biological data points, ignoring subjectivity, the lived experience of being sick, scared, or in pain. You become sort of like a statistic, right? But more importantly, healthcare is a tool of regulation. It keeps workers healthy enough to keep working, and Then there's education. Schools don't just teach math or history, they normalize certain behaviors. They condition us to follow schedules, obey authority, and accept hierarchies. As one researcher blandly put it, almost said blindly, but blandly put it, with modernity, personal value systems harmonize with current requirements. So that's that's really, like the definition of phrasing something in a bland manner, but that almost really drives home the point is that this is all very mundane kind of stuff. It's the sort of thing that is studied academically and accepted as just the main part of life. You're having your values handed to you by these institutions, and for the most part, a lot of people, they just accept them. Whatever comes down the pike, that's my culture now. And occasionally you get things like countercultures, and I'm going to get more into that as we proceed here. But for the most part, there is a lot of inducement to conform, even when you have examples of conformity backfiring on us individually. The overwhelming drive that we are pressured into having for ourselves is just to accept the value systems that we're given. For example, the use of money. If you don't think money is important, you're basically going to be marginalized automatically, right? If you're one of those people who's just, I'm not going to even touch a dollar bill. So you're going to be seen as a freak show, basically, if you view money as inherently corrupt and just refuse to have that sort of idea as a main force in your life. You're going to be probably living as a hermit in the hills or something like that. And who knows what could happen to you? So that would be a pretty strong example of somebody who's sort of living a countercultural life, and they may live to regret it by taking that stand. So it's not just some kind of wacky conspiracy theory. This stuff really is how the system works. So even our legal system, prisons, and the media function this way, disciplining deviance, shaping behavior, and reinforcing norms. So biopower also takes a new form in the digital age. It's a new phase, the digital age. We're not just being watched, we're being measured, and constantly. So again, the funny thing is, it sounds like it's paranoid, but it's also just the facts of how things work. Social media and big tech collect enormous volumes of personal data, and that's something that I stupidly feed into. I don't even give it a second thought. I don't really worry about my clicks, my searches, my online movements, if you want to call them that. Sounds like I'm talking about bowel movements, but just what I do online, I don't really think about it that much, but it's analyzed for audience targeting, behavior prediction, and yes, just control in general as a concept, I suppose. It easily brings to mind the classic quote by the anarchist Pierre Joseph Proudhon. I cannot pronounce French names, but the French guy, the famous French anarchist, he said, quote, "To be governed is to be watched, inspected, spied upon, directed, law-driven, numbered, regulated, enrolled, indoctrinated, preached at, controlled, checked, estimated, valued, censured, commanded by creatures who have neither the right nor the wisdom nor the virtue to do so. To be governed is to be at every operation, at every transaction noted, registered, counted, taxed, stamped, measured." It seems like you might have said that one already. But anyway, continuing. numbered, assessed, licensed, authorized, admonished, prevented, forbidden, reformed, corrected, punished. It is, under pretext of public utility and in the name of the general interest, to be placed under contribution, drilled, fleeced, exploited, monopolized, extorted from, squeezed, hoaxed, robbed, then at the slightest resistance, the first word of complaint to be repressed, fined, vilified, harassed, hunted down, abused, clubbed, disarmed, bound, choked, imprisoned, judged, condemned, shot, deported, sacrificed, sold, betrayed, and to crown all, mocked, ridiculed, derided, outraged, dishonored. So that sounds like the Republican platform right there. That's like their idea of what the future should be like. Just harm people basically. The Republican and the corporate Democratic platform, I suppose you might say. But anyway, after that long but excellent quote, it does get a little more complex than that. I don't want to make it seem like all these words I'm saying here mean that we should abolish every single institution or whatever and just start over from scratch as if we're grunting cavemen with no language or culture or something like that. Because not all power and monitoring is equally bad, sinister, or wrong. In fact, any organization that has any purpose at all will have some power and, yes, monitor people and influence their behavior to some extent, and that's if the organization has any significance at all. The question is, what form will the influence take, and what safeguards can people have against abuse? Because if you give people power, you're practically begging them to abuse that power, right? And if you give them a lot of power, well, then you might as well say, here you go, you can ruin my life now. Go ahead. I mean, it's a little bit naive to think that there would be any other outcome aside from at least some pattern of abuse. You don't even have to be particularly abusive to abuse your power. It's just kind of what that power ends up being for at a certain point. So currently, I think all of these questions are as relevant as ever. AI, biometrics, facial recognitions, they don't just monitor, they categorize, score, and sort people, sort of like that French guy said. And this isn't science fiction, it's already happening. Public health now depends on continuous, systematic collection, analysis, and interpretation of health related data. So it can be efficient, yes, but is it neutral? Not a chance. So that's why when it comes to medicine, it pays to have it on a non-profit basis, and you don't want to have quacks in charge. And of course, unfortunately, right now we are in a situation where we've got both of those factors to worry about very much. And there's a lot of science that is being dismantled as I speak. So thanks, RFK Jr. and people like that. And the orange one is, of course, tampering with the ability to adequately track weather, so people are not able to get properly warned in the event of severe weather, which there will be more of because of things like climate change. And, we're going to have severe weather anyway. So, those are some issues that we're uniquely dealing with at this moment. It's like we're pushing the clock back, and rarely does it seem like we push the clock back in a good sense. So, Foucault was clear: where there is power, there is also resistance, and there is resistance within the system itself. So, it doesn't always come from outside the system. in many ways, it emerges from within it, from individuals, from subcultures, and to some degree, some collective action, whether it's political protest, alternative health practices, decentralized education, or art that challenges dominant narratives. These are all cracks in the system of biopower. And to complicate things, as I tried to suggest earlier, there are some aspects of the system that were actually, in some ways, superior to some countercultural beliefs. Like, if something is too, well, if it's like a quack science, for example, then the status quo might actually be superior to the counterculture. So, as Foucault put it, the resistance is never in a position of exteriority in relation to power. End quote. So I don't know to what extent that is actually true, but it definitely sounds true, doesn't it? And, he might be kind of correct, because if you interact with something like a, I don't know, a government or a corporation, you are kind of not exterior to it exactly. That's one of the weird things about power dynamics is, even if you believe you are powerless, the mere fact that you share the same universe as the institution means that technically you do have some degree of power. It's just that you relatively have a smaller amount of it. So, once more people realize that, that's when the turmoil for those in power can start. That's why they want people to feel demoralized and like they can have no impact and all of that kind of fun stuff. Because if you think, oh, there's absolutely nothing I can do, you're just going to stay on the sidelines, and the forces that dominate society can have even more sway over people's lives. So, the resistance, or whatever you want to call it, it's messy, complex, but it's vital. It's a part of history. It's a part of contemporary life, and it's really something that matters. So understanding biopower isn't just about pointing fingers. It's about seeing the web that we're caught in and figuring out how to move through it with more awareness. Power today doesn't always feel like oppression. It feels like a fitness tracker, a university degree, a job performance review. But every one of those is a node in a network of control. And to make note of that doesn't mean you're like some paranoid lunatic. It actually just means you're factually understanding how the world around you works. Because everything that has control over your life, it is a part of, well, it is control. I mean, it is power. So if you think that that's like some wacky idea, then I think you're misunderstanding the very nature of reality itself, and what institutions are, and really what your own life is, because you are interacting with a world that has some degree of power over you. And just as you should not be able to hold power over the entire society, it makes sense that the entire society should not be able to have absolute power over you. So the trick of life is to find that balance, that point where things aren't just too overpowering, I suppose. So the goal isn't total escape, it's agency. It's recognizing how you're being shaped and deciding how you want to shape yourself. Because in the age of biopower, staying conscious is a form of resistance to its worst forms of abuse. Whew. So, all right. I hope I explained this theory and actually this reality well enough. And of course, if you have an alternate point of view, if you think what I said is just sheer nonsense, and go ahead and let me know. I'd like to know where I am wrong, but I think this is a pretty accurate picture of life as it actually is. And even though it's kind of scary to phrase things like this, to me it seems like the unflinching way to look at reality. So thanks for listening. If the episode made you think, go ahead and share it. Start a conversation. Question the system, man. And until next time, stay sharp and stay free, or at least relatively free.